This is JC with Wrong and Strong, and the objective of this video today is not to glorify narco culture or my past experience of working in that field, but is to educate people of the life that I lived in the 17 years that I spent incarcerated. I wish to show viewers the environment that has become almost normal in the American culture and Mexican culture. Nowadays it's in rap music, it's in Mexican songs, it's everywhere, and it's all out there. And I just want to give you a brief history and run on what it really is and when it started. Hey, what's up? So we're back. So I'm gonna give you a brief history run on smuggling, because this ain't something new that we're seeing in the news now. Trafficking has been happening in the United States way back. It dates back to the 19th century. All kinds of substances have been illegally imported into U.S. from days back. In the 1800s, like the Chinese immigrants arriving into California introduced Americans into smoking opiums. So they started smuggling stuff into the United States. It's something that's been happening. It's been a problem since, day one. During the Civil War, there were certain substances that were being used as pain relief. And that started a real big epidemic with, drug use. 1925, the black market opened up in the U.S. and in New York and Chinatown. And by then, there was already 200,000 addicts in the U.S. So this has been an ongoing problem since like day one. And then you got the 1950s where the mafia paved the way pretty much for the modern days for the culture of the cartels. The main focus was to make money off drug revenue. These are facts. This is not something that, I just tossed up in the air or nothing. This has been happening in the U.S. since day one. The Vietnam War started, and from 1965 to 1970, the addicts in the U.S. scored up to 700,000 addicts. 1970, the disco time started, and as you guys all know, that's when the cocaine started coming into United States. The Medellin cartel was a well-organized group of smugglers and began their base operation out of Colombia. They held control of that until about the 80s. Back then, the main drop zones was Florida. It wasn't until the fall of Pablo Escobar that the families in Mexico started to take over, that trade. The Mexican border became the main transport hub, the route into the 1990s. In the 1990s, pretty much is when Mexican traffickers, claimed the trade. Back then they were still smuggling weed and it was tar, all the stuff that Mexico was known for, and that's when I was working in the mid 1990s. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my story, but weed was the main money maker for most of the families in Mexico. And back then, that's all they were. It was a family trade. The sons, the cousins, the uncles, everybody had a job, whether it was transportation, working on the fields, growing. It wasn't as bloody as that is today. I believe that when the cocaine came into the picture, it's when you go from making $500,000 to $1 billion market, it creates a lot of problems and a lot of issues and a lot of greed. So that's when it got ugly, because back then I remember flying in, and flying out, and there was no problem, giving money, coming into the fields, and it was just normal work, and that's how it all started, man. The Sinaloa cartel was born, and it was the beginning of a new era for smuggling drugs and everything. And first time that I went to Apacingan, Michoacan, I was 16 years old. I drove out there in one of the cars, and my main job was to get it back. That was my first job as a mule. It was a 300ZX Nissan. The tanks were like really big, so they were able to fit in, I think it was 40 kilos. So 40 kilos is pretty much close to almost 90 pounds. At that time, the families were paying, because they were growing it in the fields, all that stuff. So they were paying about $10 a pound. Okay? So once it got to Mexico, I mean, once it got to Chicago, once it got out of Mexico and got into Chicago, that pound went up to $500. That's what they were going for back then. The Mexican weed, 500 a pound. So do the math. It's pretty big numbers, pretty big turnaround. And if you're sending, 3, 4, 5 cars at a time, this is how all the smaller families were, working and getting by. It was a family job. And obviously the bigger families that had been doing it for longer periods of time, they were the ones sending semi trucks, half a ton into United States. There was a big need, for it. A lot of people were buying weed, smoking weed. Up to this day, look at it now, it's legal. So, back then it was a big money maker. And so if they're sending close to 90 pounds to Chicago at $500, they're making close to 45 grand per car, 10 cars at a time going. Do the math. It's $500,000 for a small family. That's a lot of money. And back then they were paying each driver 10 to 15 grand, depending on how close he was to the family. The more I started going, the more I started getting closer and closer to the family. And most of the drivers were left in the hotel. They weren't allowed to come out or walk around the city and stuff like that with me. I got to go to the strip clubs, hang out with the guys, the uncles, the nephews. They would pick me up. We would go to there's these places in Mexico where you centro botaneros, you pay for the beer, but you don't pay for the food, and they keep bringing it and you just eat and drink all day and do coke. That's how you do. And they're very popular over there. And they would pick me up, take me there, and we would like eat and drink all day. And then we would go to the strip clubs, and they're called congales over there. And that was the way of life. I started to dress different. I went from being a street thug to wanting to be part of a family like that, wanted to be part of the cartel. And I started wearing ostrich boots. I started, wearing cintos piteados. I started wearing, hats, milekis. I started changing in a lot of ways because I started to think that was the life that I wanted. That's what I wanted to be part of. That's what, my Mexican culture was. And I started to fall in love with the whole the whole culture, the whole cartel culture. And later on you'll see how it cost me, years and years of my life, and starting to do prison time in Mexico, because that's where I got caught, and that's where my big criminal career started. Like I said, I don't make these videos to glorify nothing that I did. This is all to educate kids, people, just not to make the same mistakes that I made, because it's not everything that it's cut out to be. And trust me, you don't want to spend time in Mexican prisons, and you don't want to spend time traveling the whole United States in a plane with handcuffs and chains. I regret a lot of the things that I did. And to this day, I spend trying to help people and educate people on this topic. So please stay tuned. Please subscribe. Hit the like button. If you haven't bought my book, make sure you look it up on Amazon. Wrong and Strong, JC's Chronicles. Clothing and supplements will be up soon. Everything is. I'm scrambling to try and get everything ready right now. And just thank you for your support. Wrong and Strong, it's a way of life, it's a lifestyle. Keep doing it, and I'll see you guys soon.